Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining this panel session on sustainable data center design and operations. I'm Andrew Harrison, Chair of the European Data Center Association Technical Committee, and a Director of ARUP, and I have the great pleasure of chairing today's panel. Sustainable data center design and operations is incredibly important and hugely complex, and it's a topic which is even more important as our industry continues to grow. Demand for our services increases. Is that okay? Yeah, okay. I'll carry on. Demand for our services increases, and the impacts of climate change are increasingly apparent. The European Commission last year stated an objective for ICT to be climate neutral by 2030, which brings things into sharp focus. But how do we get there? How will the design and operation of data centers change? We seem to be okay. We seem to have a different.
Yeah, hear that as well, Andrew.
I think we'll just hold while we see what's happening with the second stream that we're getting through. Is there some technical support, Eileen, in terms of whether we're back on? Great,
yes,
thank you.
We're working on it. It's gone now, right? Yeah, okay, fixed, great. Yeah.
Okay, so apologies, I'm not sure where the live stream went then in terms of just providing an introduction, but I'll carry on from broadly where I was, and that was really just setting out that as an industry we have a real challenge around how we move forward to becoming climate neutral by 2030 in response to European Commission challenge to us. And really how, and the challenge I think for us and the purpose of today's discussion in part is to touch on, how we get there, how will the design and operation of data centers change, and how do we deal with issues like legacy older data centers as well as the new ones. As chair of the technical committee at the EUDCA, we're very keen to try and move this agenda forward. And one of the things we're working on at the moment is progressing a proposal to develop a self-regulatory framework aligned with the climate neutral goal to hopefully help us on this journey. And you should hear more about that in the coming weeks. So a lot to talk about. I am pleased to be joined today by Eric, Karim and Rob. And I'd now like each of the panelists to introduce themselves and to then comment on what a sustainable data center or sustainable data center design and operation means from their perspective. Eric, could I go to you first, please?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eric Lisica. I'm the operations director for our Mountain Datacenters in Western Europe. Our Mountain Datacenters is a global operator of data center facilities with locations in the US, in Asia, as well as in Europe. Talking about sustainability and looking where we're coming from, if you would have asked me that questions like 5 years ago, the answer would be pretty straightforward and simple. I mean, we were basically reducing our overhead and optimizing our cooling systems and looking at how we're design and operate the data halls. The last couple of years, we've learned a lot about the different aspects of sustainability. So it's becoming more complicated as more aspects are actually brought to the table, like how do we actually design and build our data centers? What type of power are we using and how do we source that power? But also how do we interact with our environment and what are the options to play part in the bigger scheme of sustainability discussions, like using residual heat to facilitate heat networks, for instance. So it's a broader topic than it was a couple of years ago. Nevertheless, an interesting and a more important topic as well.
Thanks very much, Eric. Can I go to you, Rob?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rob McKernan, Senior Vice President of Secure Power Division of Schneider Electric. I've been involved in the data center business here in Europe or back in my home in the US for the last 20 plus years. And I would say that sustainability is embedded in everything we do here at Schneider Electric. We have a firm belief that today electricity and digital technologies are the recipe for a more sustainable world. So to me, I would say that a sustainable data center is a facility that helps the operators like Eric and many others and their customers balance those business needs, which is so critical, without compromising that future impact on the environment. And I think there's really three quick areas that we need to focus on. We need a resource efficient design with access to renewables and the latest in green premium products. I think we have to have an open system and software to drive greater efficiencies, because we know a lot changes from a day-to-day operation standpoint. So I think we'll talk a lot about that day-to-day operations. And finally, I think it's going to become part of what I would say a circular system, using equipment that lasts longer, that's easily recyclable, that supports low waste, so that true circular economy.
Great, thanks, Rob. And Karim?
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you for joining our session here. So my name is Karim Ait-Younes. I am in charge for the sales for the EMEA region at the Stulz company. So Stulz is a global vendor for the data center industry, selling cooling systems, specific cooling systems for data centers. So, of course, what is a sustainable data center? So, from our perspective, of course, sustainable data centers, beside being high resilient and so on, must have, first of all, a high security level. So, for persons and IT equipment. So there we have on the refrigerant side all the F-gas regulation things and so on. And then we have, of course, the low carbon footprint. So where we have to see how to limit the usage of energy. So we started, of course, with sustainability long time ago, where we were the first one to develop free cooling systems. So I am talking for more than 30 years ago. And of course, we are today, our focus is still to develop new products, keeping this in mind. But not only this, but also to, not only on the electricity side, but also to have a usage of less resources, as for example, water. So
Great.
That's from our side.
Great, thank you, Karim. And I think it's interesting in that sort of introduction from each of you that I think it really brings out that issue of complexity and the fact that we've got design issues to consider, we've got operational issues to consider, we've got power purchase agreements, we've got embodied carbon in equipment which is supplied, and we've got recycling. So there's an awful lot of issues in this overall agenda, and it is complex and it is changing quite fast as well. But it certainly seems as though it's moving up on everyone's agenda, which I certainly think is a very positive and good thing. And I guess I'm curious as to your views in terms of whether we're doing enough as an industry. Are we moving fast enough? And are we really dealing with the challenge around climate impact? I'd be interested, Eric, in your perspective as a sort of from an operator lens, how you feel we're doing as an industry.
I think we're moving. We're moving at a decent speed. Question if we're doing enough and if we're moving fast enough also triggers a couple of questions specifically with regards to legacy data centers and how you're going to bring these centers up to speed. But I also think that there's definitely opportunity to even speed up and look at other ways to further reduce the overall carbon footprint of the full ICT delivery stack. And just to give you one example, In our multi-tenant data centers, all the IT equipment belongs to our customers. However, as a centralized point where all that ICT equipment is gathered, that almost pushes us towards a responsibility to come up with a decent plan to also get rid of that hardware once it's becoming obsolete. And I think one of the tricks that it feels like we're sometimes missing is we could define programs to support our customers with optimizing those residual streams of hardware. Actually, under the Iron Mountain umbrella, we're now providing what we call SITED services, so secure infrastructure asset disposal, where we offer our customers to actually take care of their obsolete hardware and make sure it's either recycled or reused, or at least disposed in an environmental friendly way.
Great, thank you. And that I think is in a very interesting perspective, that one around recycling. And Rob, you mentioned that I think as well in your introduction. Has that changed your business? And is there a new service now you are offering your clients that maybe you weren't offering 5 or so years ago?
Yeah, I think it's interesting what Eric just said. I think that a sustainable data center, I think we've made great progress here in Europe in a lot of these areas. And I think in some ways, when I look globally, I think Europe is starting to lead the way in this topic, which I want to make sure I get that point out. But there is, from a product, and Schneider Electric provides technology, I think that it's really interesting. I think we're seeing changes in the data center design more towards a prefabricated data centers, which offers greater predictability, efficiency, flexibility. We are seeing a lot of ingenuity in products, right? So green premium products, using recycled materials, better efficiency standards. Our switchgear, for instance, SF6 free switchgear. So each of our product groups are really starting to focus on the life to life of that product from birth to the end and the impact on the environment. So I think from a product piece, that component of what a sustainable data center, I think, is making good improvements, and a lot of runway still to go on that aspect.
Right. And is that leading you towards having more of a service agreement solution as well? Is that something you're exploring, Rob?
Yeah, we're trying to do a couple of things on a service side. On the front end side, Schneider is helping customers with energy procurement, right? How can we move the energy you procure for that data center to a more closer to 100% green technology, right? So I think that's a service we offer on the front end. And then on the back end, yeah, there's a lot we can do in terms of retrofits. Again, Eric mentioned the topic on existing data centers and some of the inefficiencies. Certainly the inefficiency we see on data centers that were designed and built 5 years ago, far different than what we see that's being put into the market today, that is starting much closer to being that goal of sustainability. Great.
And I think, Karim, if we come to you, to me, the issues around environmental parameters and our cooling solutions in data centers has hugely changed over the last couple of years with response, I think, to the pressures around sustainability and greater awareness of carbon emissions. Do you feel as though that technology has really changed and made an impact? What's your view, and what do you think the next trend could be?
Yes, of course. We have seen a big change all over the years on the air conditioning technology. But in our opinion, the biggest drive for this change was not that much, let's say, the carbon issue. Of course, we see approaches like the F-gas regulation, or as mentioned by Eric, all the heat recovery concepts which are there. But what we see, or what our impression is that the economical factor is still very, very predominant, because we have also solutions which can improve much more the energy usage, but due to economical considerations, it's very difficult to sell them. So what we see, yes, there is a change, but in our opinion, or also in my opinion, the changes in the air conditionings are more coming from the limits on temperatures, so which of course allowed us to go to new systems. We have the F-gas regulation, which will bring new changes specifically on the refrigerant side. But the economical factor, in our opinion, is still the major one today.
Mm. Okay. And I guess one way of interpreting what you just said is that actually the business case around sustainability is there, or it can be there. And I think historically it's often been a challenge around business case, which has meant maybe we haven't invested in new technologies or done things that we would like to do. But again, maybe that environment is changing. Just to flag that, obviously, audience, you're very welcome to ask questions. So please, if you can pop questions up, I might pick up one or two as we go through the discussion, and otherwise we'll probably come to a question and answer session more towards the end. Questions, and there is one that I'm just going to come to now because I think it links into that discussion we've just been having, and that picks up the issue of recycling. And it was a particular question for you, Eric, in terms of are there specific companies now where you see IT recycling as being something which is practical, which is really happening? Have you got any particular experience of that?
It's happening more often, but if you look at it, absolutely, the amount of companies who still have that high on their agenda is still too low. So there's definitely a lot of room for improvement. But it starts by it starts by telling the story that these things are possible and these things are happening, and for some larger customers who really are aware of their impact of potentially recycling equipment. I think that's the relative easy bridge to cross. But if you come to smaller customers, retail customers who have relatively a few amount of servers, the hassle for them to get connected to a proper decommissioning process and get in touch with companies who are able to recycle their equipment is harder. Hence our attempts to play a part in to facilitate our customers with offering that specific service.
I think that's a good point, Eric. If I can interject, I think there is a certain burden on manufacturers as well, and there are examples, I think, of manufacturers who are improving this in terms of helping operators or helping the end clients with this notion of recycling and the circular piece. I believe it's improved dramatically over the last, say, 12 to 18 months. And I think there's going to be an exponential improvement over the coming year or two, because I do think that's a potential gap still that, again, we're going to talk a lot about how this has a sustainable data center has to be a holistic approach between the customer, the operator, and the manufacturer, the designer. We all have to work together better on this. And I think this is one area where we can work together better as an industry for the mutual benefit of the client as well as of course the environment.
And that leads in my mind to a bit of a question around whether technology is the answer. We're a very technology focused sector, and logically you could say, well, actually let's be smart about this. How can our technology, how can our knowledge really help us? And there's certainly trends, aren't there, in terms of new types of equipment, types of solutions, but I also wonder what your perspectives would be on how sort of data insights are helping us. So with things like DSIM and other tools, and maybe increasing sophistication with the equipment that's installed within data centers. Is that awareness of the performance of those different components of the data center systems actually helping us? Is that driving a reduction in carbon? Do you see that as being beneficial? I don't know who would like to take that one. Maybe go to you, Eric, first of all. So your thoughts.
Yeah, so the essence of your question is technology the answer? That only partly. I think if you look at improving your sustainability performance, it starts obviously with measuring. Whether that's DSIM or you using any other technology, there's no good or bad, I think, as long as you're aware what you're using, how you're using, and you understand how to optimize your sustainability goals. But I also wanted to stress that it's not the only answer. If you look at the work that my colleagues here have been doing over the last couple of years, and you look at the tremendous optimization in equipment, the more efficient UPSs, the more efficient cooling systems, that's been huge jumps over the last 5, 6, 7 years. So I do think we've reached like really that next stage where we need to look beyond and it doesn't stop. Don't get me wrong, we still need to continue to optimize that, but I think there's alternatives to increase the optimization of our carbon footprint, like the recycling discussion we just had, like the optimization of the usage of residual heat, which is becoming more like almost like political or investment discussion than truly a technical item.
And there's a lot of discussion about IoT and smart. I guess, Rob and Karim, it's impacting your businesses in terms of the equipment, the connectivity the equipment has. Do you from your lens, do you see that as being again beneficial to your clients?
Yeah, certainly as a technology provider, I'm contractually obligated to say technology is the difference. But in all seriousness, I agree 100% with what Eric was alluding to. It is this holistic approach, right? So I have seen that many operators, and Eric's company is a great example of a company that now is creating and deploying the global climate strategy. What does that mean? Well, you have to use tools like a DSIM or other aspects that are vendor agnostic analytics tool to understand, during the operation of your existing data centers or those IoT environments, what is happening, and when you make changes, what does that change do? I think most of the operators now are thinking about how do we maximize renewables and clean energy. Now that these points, all of them, I think what Karim said about cost and managing the cost equation with the sustainability equation is something we're all working on individually, and we all need to continue working on better. And I think, for instance, Andrew, some of the work you're doing with your group in EUDCA, I think that's crucial work, which is bringing more tangible parts of this ecosystem together for this greater good. Because Schneider can't solve this problem, Iron Mountain can't solve this problem alone, Stulz can't. None of us can solve it alone. This is something that's going to require a lot of collaboration together to make meaningful steps each and every year.
Yeah, no, I would certainly concur with that, and I think one of the kind of real areas of awareness now that a number of the industry bodies, the data center industry bodies, I would suggest have, is the one around, we have a big responsibility in many ways to do what we can to be sustainable, to head towards being climate neutral, etc. And it's in our interest to do that, because it's far better for us to control that direction and that journey than necessarily have legislation imposed on us. And given we're a relatively new industry, we don't have quite so much legislation that necessarily is a burden to the business in comparison to some others. So we have a responsibility, I think, that comes with that, to also do what we can to move forward. And it's been interesting that in this conversation we haven't really picked up the issue of power purchase agreements and buying kind of green electricity. And I think that's probably a strong message, I think, that I'm picking up from all of you, that really what we've got to do is try and deal with things at source. And yes, green energy has its place, and renewable sources absolutely have their place. But ultimately, what can we do to reduce the core demand and supply? I think you've all touched on that, and I know, again, Karim, coming maybe to you for a minute, in terms of the environmental systems, the environmental controls within data centers, that does seem to be where there's been a big change in terms of demand. There's a new range of systems that maybe weren't around a number of years ago, as you picked up water earlier on, and I think that's interesting in that we may have reduced the energy demand, but we may have increased the water demand, which then has a sustainability impact. How do we rationalize that?
Yeah, how do we rationalize it? No, anyhow, just to come back, for us, definitely technology is one of the biggest pillar to reach the goal. Of course, it's not the only one. For the air conditioning systems, which are one of the biggest, if not the biggest, beside the IT consumer of energy in the data center, something between 15 to 30%. We have to develop, of course, systems where we use the less resources. In this case, I don't talk only about energy, because we see that a lot of people are talking about adiabatic, for example. But when we think about adiabatic, to cool a data center in the sizes that we are seeing today, it means several swimming pools per day of water usage. Of course, then we will have the energy saving, but then we have the water problem. Adiabatic brings other problems with it, is all the Legionella thing, the hygienic thing, and so on. It's why in my introduction I was talking about the safety of the people. So all these aspects, we have to consider all these aspects, and of course try with research to get the best products to fulfill the goal to have the task done. It means cooling the equipment by using the less resources, even in the equipment. Rob talked about it, that we use recyclable materials, or materials which are done by recycled materials already. Like for the steel, we have a clear quota for us as Stulz, where it must be recycled steel, which we are using to produce our products. So all the aspects are there. Then you have the aspect of having an intelligent machine. Of course, an intelligent machine gives us two advantages. You have the security aspect, what happens if one air conditioning fall down and so on, how can we compensate the airflow and so on. And of course, is to provide just the necessary cooling, because a lot of studies showed in the past that the air conditioning is producing too much cooling compared to what is needed. So the more intelligent the machine is, so how the solution is, there are several solutions to do this. Of course, then we will just use the energy necessary to fulfill the job, let's say. So this is how we see it, and this is our daily challenge. So through research and development to get to the best products for the market.
Okay, thank you. And a question has popped up just asking around a perspective on WUE. So I think with PUE, from my perspective, it's pretty well understood, you know, and we have a sort of consensus view now in terms of what it means. WUE is slightly newer, and I'm not sure really whether we do have a sort of well developed understanding yet. I wonder, Karim, what your thoughts would be on that.
The WUE.
Yes. So
is it?
So water utilization.
Okay.
WUE.
We are not really using this water use today because first of all, we try to avoid the use of water as much as possible. Of course, we have adiabatic systems, even it's not our preferred system from perspective of the vendor, because we think that there are other systems. But for us today, we are not really faced to this KPI, let's say. The PUE, yes, we hear a lot, EER, whatever. There is even another one, I forgot the name, is compared to the air usage or how many air are we providing. But the WUE, today we are not faced to it a lot. I don't know about my colleagues here, how they see it, but this is
this is Rob. No, it's interesting, Andrew. I love how you said we all agree on PUE. It only took us probably 10 years to everyone to agree on that for the most part, but and we all had our issues with PUE from time to time. I think there are WUE to me is a sub KPI, but I love this concept where, you know, I think all organizations that are on this call need to have that clear climate strategy with the measurable objectives, and then the clear tactical plans that go along with it. My company Schneider Electric has this. All the large companies in the world have started documenting these strategies, but us here in the data center industry, I think we want to continue to lead in this world, and that includes sort of the self-regulation. That's what PUE sort of, we all kind of as operators and manufacturers, we kind of came together to kind of develop that sort of you know what that metric is, and I think we need to continue to regulate ourselves in this world, not worry about the EU and some of their climate goals. We should be able to come up, and I think this is one area that we can come together and agreed upon the model or the metric for sustainability, not just water, not just PUE, but what is our sustainability metric then, and how we help drive efficiency in that market, so we can put some sort of framework together as an industry. And I think, again, having experience being from the US, living here in Paris for 4 years now, I think Europe, we're kind of well positioned to do this in Europe and kind of take the lead for the whole world, starting here in Europe, because we are ahead. From what I see, looking east into Asia and west back into my home of the US, I think we're ahead on this topic of sustainability inside the data center industry. Still have a long way to go, but we are talking about this much more readily than I think some of our counterparts in other parts of the world.
Yeah, that's great. Eric, I think you want to add something.
Yeah, it's fair to say that we've by reducing the energy consumption, we automatically increased the usage of water. So it's definitely coming from an operator point of view, it's a topic. I think one of the things we shouldn't forget is that, in my opinion, one of the reasons why PUE has proven to be so successful is that it's not just about reducing energy, but there's a huge economical driver behind it. And I think at the moment that driver for WWE is less. So it's easier to find the funds to invest in optimization of energy efficiency than it is on changing your infrastructure to implement water reuse systems, for instance. And that's not the reason not to do it. But as Rob fairly said, it took us about 10 years to get to a stage where we are with that PUE, and we knew we had a huge economical driver as well. Getting that water usage down is probably a more complicated question.
Great, thank you. We've got a couple of questions I suggest we go to now. We've got about another 10 minutes. First question I'd like to come to is around tackling embodied carbon. So, you know, how is it best to tackle that? And maybe if I could come to you, Eric, on that, you know, as a fairly kind of complex organisation, how do Iron Mountain look at embedded carbon?
Help me out here. What's the exact definition of embedded carbon? What's the
I think in this context, I think we're looking at obviously the assets, the equipment, but then actually if we start to look at the other scopes of carbon, then it's everything associated with operations. So it becomes, you know, your business travel and all those other things, and your supply chain. So you expand from one definition to a very broad definition of complete carbon.
I got it. It's basically it's about doing what's right. So stimulating the use of electrical vehicles, for instance, but also reducing the amount of travel. Well, we got something going on in the world today, which is sort of enforcing us to travel probably less than we've ever done. But it's also about relatively simple things. So what do you do with all the packaging material which enters your data center? Can you support your customers if you look at their IT environment, and can you provide them with an advice on based on energy usage and performance and the exact moment that it's wise to replace that ICT infrastructure, for instance? So it's not a single answer. Think about building and designing data centers more in relation to BREEAM and the materials you use. So there's multiple answers to that, and I think it's fair to say that for each and every aspect, it would require close cooperation with your suppliers and with your customers to actually optimize. Is that an answer to that question?
I think so. I think it's a great answer to a very difficult question, actually.
Yeah, if I may, Eric, I think that is a tough question. You did well with it. I would say that the end-to-end carbon piece obviously is a huge piece for Karim and I in terms of being manufacturers, right? It's the end-to-end supply chain of developing products, shipping products, the design and build, and specifically the build part of the data center, and then you continually get into the end of life and the full circular economy of your product life. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I think the manufacturer, this is one of the areas I think that really the manufacturer plays a role. And then again, back to the operator, I think it's the decarbonization of the energy mix, in optimizing your energy mix with your energy costs and the renewal of the renewals, and using more of the renewals. I think that's going to be the piece, whether it's microgrids, energy credits, all the pieces about energy procurement that we won't have time to touch upon in an in-depth way, but I think there's a lot of opportunity there from the carbon perspective.
And Rob, maybe keeping with you, can I just ask, do you Schneider get involved in an awful lot of different areas, and do you see any particular kind of game-changing technologies coming through? There's obviously a lot of debate about batteries and how lithium-ion battery technologies could change, whether we can move away from diesel generators for backup as a consequence, those sorts of things. Any view in terms of whether there could be any big shifts coming?
Yeah, I think there's this ongoing shift in terms of each of the technologies that we play in. I see continued solid incremental steps. You mentioned one right off the bat with batteries. Lithium ion is good. Interestingly enough, I would say that adoption of lithium is fair here in Europe, not as good as in other parts of the world. Perhaps that has to do with the cost challenges that Karim mentioned when he was talking about some of it. cooling technology that he also was spoken about. I see some good opportunities there. We see a lot of really good opportunities in actual switchgear and the electrical distribution side. I think that's where we're really starting to see big benefits, carbon neutral benefits coming in that area. And then I think the other benefit is, I think the tools, the operating tools that Schneider and other companies, whether it's DSEM or other analytics, I think they're becoming better and more user-friendly to help with the operations challenge. So maybe the answer to your question, Andrew, is there's not one single bullet necessarily, but I think there's a lot of holistic pieces in different technologies throughout our portfolio and in others' portfolio as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Maybe just come to another question that's been posed around residual heat from data centers, and I think that was touched on earlier on. But opportunities to reuse heat. Can we create ecosystems with other organisations around us? It seems that there's quite a lot of practical challenges typically there. I'm not sure, Eric, whether that's something you can comment on.
Yeah, especially if you talk about larger scale projects, it's proven to be complicated. As an example, our data center in Amsterdam, we're working closely with the authorities to see, look if there are opportunities to develop like a district heating system based on the residual heat of the data center. But you need a lot of organizations, companies, and stakeholders to basically agree. Not in the last place, the consumers of that residual heat need to buy into it. I've seen business cases where it probably takes like 30 to 35 years before such a system has reached its payback date. There's a lot of infrastructure required. There's a lot of technology required. So I think as an industry, we've said for years we've got this residual heat, but how do we get it to the people, the customers, and the companies who actually need it? And I think in the execution of that process, there's definitely space for room for improvement. Although having said that, I do think it will remain a difficult question unless we start thinking on where do we build data centers and how do we build data centers, and do you bring your data centers maybe closer to the users of residual heat. Yeah.
So more of maybe an integrated solution, working with other bits of society, as it were. Okay, we're just about coming to an end. Can I just ask each of you maybe to provide a final comment? It would have to be very short, and almost it could be one word if you'd like. So any specific advice you would want to share with data center operators in around this sustainable journey and working towards being climate neutral? One particular piece of advice you would like to share?
Yeah, I will start. I would say, from an operator perspective, find a partner to work with, a company like Schneider or others. Have an evaluation of your current setup in terms of all the data centers you're operating today. Let's have a strategy around that. Obviously, have a strategy around your design, and with very clear sustainability as well as efficiency, as well as your cost goals that you already have in place. And then finally, the utilization of renewables and that clear climate strategy. It's the overarching everything.
Great, thanks, Rob. And Karim?
I think for me is to have, first of all, the sustainability higher in the priority list when it comes to build a new data center, and then having a holistic approach in the design. Because when you save energy, let's say on the cooling system, so maybe you can take smaller generators and all these and these aspects, to always have the holistic approach to see what is best, looking at the whole concept. So as we had before, water usage, or how many electricity, where do I get the electricity from, and having the holistic approach. And of course, is what is my priority when I start the design of, so if the priority will be sustainability, then it will take a bigger role.
Great, thank you. And a final word from you, Eric?
Well, I would say put the bar as high as you can, and dare to go beyond what we're used to. So talk to your suppliers, talk to your customers, and look how you can jointly optimize the carbon footprint in the whole ICT delivery chain. We can have the best PUE in the world, but if your customer is using 20-year-old servers, we're still in square one.
Very good point. Yes, very good point. Okay, so I think that draws us nicely to an end, actually. That's a lovely point to end on. We've used up our 45 minutes, so thank you very much for all of those who have joined this session. Thanks for joining. I hope you found it informative and interesting. And thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Karim. Thank you, Rob. And that ends this session. Thank you.